In 2006, Borders Group reported more than $4 billion in annual revenue. The company operated over 1,200 bookstores worldwide, most of them large-format locations with cafes, music sections, and deep shelves that stretched far beyond bestsellers. For many American cities, a Borders store was not just a retailer, but a fixed point in the commercial landscape. 5 years later, the company filed for bankruptcy. By the end of 2011, its stores were closed, its inventory liquidated, and its name removed from the streets it once occupied. Borders had not emerged suddenly. The company's roots went back to 1971, when two University of Michigan students developed a computerized inventory system for their small campus bookstore. That system allowed them to stock more titles than competitors and to track sales with unusual precision. When Borders expanded beyond Ann Arbor, that capability became its defining advantage. While smaller bookstores curated limited selections, Borders pursued scale and breadth. The stores were large, often occupying prominent real estate, and they carried tens of thousands of titles. The premise was straightforward. Readers wanted choice, and Borders would provide it in physical form. By the 1990s, this model appeared validated. The company expanded aggressively across the United States and internationally. Its stores became standardized in layout and experience. Customers could expect wide aisles, category-based organization, in-store seating, and later, cafes that encouraged longer visits. Borders also sold music and movies, reinforcing the idea that the store was a general cultural outlet rather than a narrow bookshop. As big box retail grew in other sectors, Borders seemed to represent a similar evolution in books: consolidation, efficiency, and national presence. The competitive environment reinforced this confidence. Independent bookstores were declining, unable to match Borders' purchasing power or selection. Barnes and Noble was the primary national rival, operating a similar superstore model. Online retail existed, but in the late 1990s it was not yet dominant. Amazon, founded in 1994, was primarily a bookseller, but it operated at a scale and with margins that were still evolving. For Borders' leadership, the threat landscape appeared familiar. The company was competing against another chain and a fragmented set of independents, using real estate, inventory depth, and in-store experience as its primary levers. Internally, Borders' strategy was shaped by its strengths. The company invested heavily in store expansion, believing that geographic presence drove brand recognition and customer loyalty. The fixed costs of large stores were high, but they were justified by volume. Each new location was expected to mature into a stable cash generator. The assumption underlying this approach was that demand for physical books, music, and media would remain durable, and that customers valued the tactile experience enough to continue visiting stores even as online options improved. There were early signals that this assumption might not hold indefinitely. Online retailers began to offer broader selection without physical constraints. Prices were often lower, and delivery times shortened. Customer reviews and recommendation algorithms added a different kind of discovery experience, one not dependent on shelf space. Borders was aware of these developments, but its response reflected caution rather than urgency. The company launched its own website, but it did not invest in building a robust e-commerce infrastructure. In 2001, Borders made a decision that would later define its relationship to the digital market. Rather than developing its own online sales platform, the company outsourced its e-commerce operations to Amazon. Under the agreement, Amazon handled online sales for Borders branded products, while Borders received a share of the revenue. At the time, this arrangement reduced risk and capital expenditure. Amazon already had logistics, payment systems, and technical expertise. Borders, focused on its stores, viewed online sales as incremental rather than central. This decision was rational within the context of the early 2000s. E-commerce margins were thin, technology costs were high, and online book sales represented a small portion of the overall market. By partnering rather than competing directly, Borders preserved resources for its core business. What the arrangement also did, less visibly, was prevent Borders from developing internal digital capabilities. Customer data, purchasing behavior, and technological learning accumulated on Amazon's side of the relationship, not Borders. As the decade progressed, market conditions shifted more decisively. Online retail became mainstream. Broadband adoption increased, logistics improved, and consumer trust in online transactions solidified. Amazon expanded beyond books, using scale to subsidize pricing and invest in technology. At the same time, digital media began to alter consumption patterns. Music sales moved toward downloads and streaming, undermining one of Borders' in-store categories. DVDs followed a similar trajectory. Borders' physical footprint, once an advantage, became a constraint. Large stores required long leases and significant operating expenses. Sales per square foot declined as customers shifted portions of their purchasing online. Unlike smaller retailers, Borders could not easily downsize locations without exiting markets entirely. The company continued to open stores into the mid-2000s, extending commitments based on projections that no longer reflected emerging behavior. When Borders ended its partnership with Amazon in 2007, the company attempted to re-enter e-commerce independently. By that point, the gap was substantial. Building an online platform required not only technology investment but organizational change. Borders lacked the internal experience to iterate quickly in a digital environment. Its website struggled with usability and inventory integration. Meanwhile, competitors were refining recommendation systems, fulfillment speed, and digital content delivery. The introduction of e-readers accelerated the divergence. Amazon's Kindle, launched in 2007, tied hardware, content, and distribution into a single ecosystem. Borders did not have a comparable offering. The company partnered with third-party devices and platforms, but these relationships were fragmented. Borders sold e-readers in stores, but it did not control the underlying digital marketplace. As with its earlier Amazon partnership, Borders participated in the category without owning its infrastructure. Financial pressure mounted as revenues declined. The fixed cost structure left little room for error. To conserve cash, Borders reduced inventory and delayed payments to publishers. These measures provided short-term relief but strained supplier relationships. Store conditions deteriorated as staffing was reduced and maintenance deferred. The in-store experience, once a differentiator, became uneven. Debt amplified these challenges. Borders had taken on significant obligations during its expansion phase, including lease commitments and financing tied to store growth. As sales fell, servicing this debt consumed an increasing share of cash flow. The company attempted to renegotiate leases and close underperforming locations, but the process was slow and costly. Each closure reduced revenue further, complicating recovery. Management explored strategic alternatives. There were discussions about mergers, asset sales, and further restructuring. None provided a comprehensive solution. The underlying issue was not a single misstep, but a cumulative mismatch between Borders' operating model and the market's direction. Physical scale, once central to its identity, limited flexibility. Digital adaptation required capabilities the company had not developed when it was most able to do so. By 2010, Borders' position had weakened significantly. Vendors tightened credit terms, requiring cash payments that strained liquidity. Inventory shortages became visible to customers. Store closures accelerated, signaling instability. In February 2011, Borders filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing listed hundreds of stores slated for closure and outlined plans to restructure remaining operations. The restructuring efforts did not succeed. Potential buyers were unwilling to assume the company's liabilities, and the value of its assets lay primarily in inventory rather than ongoing operations. In July 2011, Borders announced it would liquidate its remaining stores. By September, the last locations closed. Employees were laid off, and the company's physical presence ended. What remained of Borders was limited. Its brand was sold, and some digital assets were absorbed by other retailers. The infrastructure that had supported its stores, distribution centers, systems, and leases was dismantled. For customers, the change was immediate and visible. Buildings that once housed expansive bookstores were repurposed or left vacant. Borders had been more than a seller of books. Its stores functioned as informal public spaces, places where people browsed without obligation and spent time without a transaction. That role was not captured on a balance sheet, but it was part of the company's appeal. When Borders disappeared, that particular retail format receded with it. The company's collapse did not stem from a lack of awareness or a single poor decision. Its leadership responded to conditions as they appeared, prioritizing stability and known strengths. The choices made were coherent within their context. What changed was the context itself, faster than the organization could adjust. Borders' history reflects a broader transition in retail, from physical abundance to digital access. The systems built to manage shelves and square footage proved less adaptable to a market defined by data and distribution networks. The assumptions that supported Borders' growth persisted longer than the environment that made them reliable. For a generation of readers, Borders was how books were encountered, sampled, and chosen. That infrastructure and the habits formed around it dissolved quietly once the economics no longer sustained it. The company's absence marked not just the end of a retailer, but the passing of a particular way of interacting with culture through commerce.